There are some places in the world that feel off, like they're hiding something that doesn't belong. I thought I was just riding a faulty elevator in an old building, but when the doors opened on the 4th floor, I found myself somewhere I shouldn't have been. A hallway that didn't exist. A man who wasn't supposed to be there. And an elevator that refused to take me back. What I saw that night, I can't explain it. But I'll never be the same again. Keep listening to find out what happened next. But before we start, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you'll never miss a spine-tingling episode. If you're enjoying the content, don't forget to like, comment, and share the video. And if you want even more, stay connected with us on our social media platforms for more creepy content. Thank you all for being part of this journey with me. And now let's dive into the darkness together. I work as a financial analyst at a mid-sized firm in the heart of downtown Chicago. My office is located in an old building that's been renovated several times, but still has a certain aged charm to it. The building is one of those that feels like it has a history. One you can almost feel in the creaking floorboards and the dull hum of the elevators. Everyone always jokes about how the building seems to have a personality, with the elevators acting up from time to time. The elevator is notoriously slow and has a weird habit of getting stuck between floors, but we all just laugh it off, attributing it to the building's age. It was a regular Wednesday evening, and I had stayed late to finish a report for an upcoming board meeting. The office had cleared out hours ago, and I was the only one left working. As usual, the fluorescent lights above buzzed softly, casting an eerie, sterile glow across the rows of empty desks. I looked up at the clock. It was 8:30 p.m. I figured I had just enough time to grab a quick cup of coffee from the break room, which was located on the 4th floor. The building's elevators are small, with old brass buttons and dingy metal doors that always seem to squeak when they open and close. I pressed the button to call the elevator, waiting for it to arrive. After a few moments, I heard the familiar sound of the elevator slowly ascending, and the doors opened with a mechanical groan. I stepped in, pressed the button for the 4th floor, and waited for the ride to begin. The elevator started to ascend, but it didn't feel quite right. It didn't feel as smooth as usual. It jolted slightly, as if it were struggling to move. I thought nothing of it at first, chalking it up to the building's age. But then something strange happened. The elevator didn't stop at the 4th floor. I looked at the floor indicator above the door. It showed the elevator was passing the 4th floor, moving on to the 5th. That's odd, I thought, but maybe the elevator was just a little off tonight. I pressed the button for the 4th floor again, hoping to correct whatever mistake the elevator was making. But instead of stopping on the 5th floor, the elevator kept going. It didn't stop at the 6th, 7th, or 8th floors either. It just kept moving upward. I began to feel a little uneasy. I checked the floor indicator again. The numbers were still moving, but they were skipping floors. I pressed the emergency stop button, but it didn't work. The elevator was moving by itself, up and up. I tried to stay calm. It was just a malfunction, I reasoned. The elevator would stop at some point, and I'd be able to take the stairs to get back to the office. But the elevator didn't stop. Instead, after what felt like an eternity, the elevator came to a halt with a sudden jolt. The doors opened. I didn't know what to expect, but it definitely wasn't what I saw. When the elevator doors slid open, I found myself staring into a hallway I had never seen before. It was long and narrow, with flickering fluorescent lights overhead. The walls were bare, painted in a drab shade of yellow that was peeling in places. The carpet was worn, and there was an eerie, musty smell that hung in the air. It looked like something out of a horror movie, a forgotten part of the building that no one had been into for years. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. I stepped out of the elevator, glancing at the floor directory near the hallway entrance. The directory listed all the floors of the building, but there was no indication of what floor I was on. The floor numbers didn't match anything on the list. There was no 4th floor listed at all. Instead, the directory was entirely blank, except for one strange word scribbled in pen at the bottom. Stay out. My heart started racing as I backed toward the elevator, my mind spinning. Was this some sort of joke? A prank? I pressed the button to call the elevator again, but it didn't respond. I could still hear the faint hum of the lights above me, but other than that, the building was completely silent. No footsteps, no voices, just a deep, unsettling quiet. I decided to investigate further. I took a few steps down the hallway, my shoes making soft tapping sounds on the carpet. The air was cold and still. The further I walked, the more I felt like I was being watched, as if unseen eyes were tracking my every move. I turned the corner at the end of the hallway and was greeted with another set of doors. This one was slightly ajar with a dim light flickering from inside. I pushed the door open tentatively, half expecting to find some maintenance room or storage closet. But what I saw inside made my blood run cold. The room was completely dark, except for a single desk lamp on the far side of the room. Sitting at the desk was a man in a dark suit, his back to me. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his presence. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I took a step backward, about to leave the room when he suddenly spoke. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was low, calm, and strangely unbothered. I froze, unsure of how to react. Before I could say anything, the man turned around slowly in his chair. His face was hidden in shadow, but his eyes, those eyes, stared directly at me. They were dark, empty, almost like they had no life behind them. I didn't wait to find out who he was or why he was there. I spun around and rushed back to the elevator, pressing the button repeatedly. After what seemed like an eternity, the elevator doors opened, and I rushed inside, heart pounding in my chest. The elevator didn't move at first. I pressed the button for the 4th floor again, but it seemed stuck. The numbers on the display blinked erratically before finally settling on the 1st floor. I had no choice but to exit the elevator, not knowing what would happen next. When the doors opened, I found myself back in the lobby, just as I had left it. The receptionist, who was usually long gone by that time, was still sitting behind her desk, staring at the computer screen. She didn't acknowledge me as I walked out, and I didn't say anything to her. I just left the building as quickly as I could, never looking back. I've never been able to explain what happened that night. I've gone back to the building since then, but I haven't used the elevator again. I've heard rumors about the building, strange occurrences, things that don't make sense. People say there's an old part of the building that's been sealed off, but I've never been able to confirm it. As for that man I saw, I can't shake the feeling that I wasn't meant to see him. That hallway, that strange room, it wasn't part of the building I knew. And to this day, I can't forget the feeling of being watched, trapped in a place that wasn't supposed to exist. I don't know if the building is haunted, or if it was something far worse. But I do know one thing. I'm never stepping foot in that elevator again. I had always been one to avoid superstitions. I didn't believe in ghosts, spirits, or any of the paranormal stuff people like to talk about. To me, the world made sense, logical, clear, and straightforward. But there was one experience that still haunts me to this day. It happened in a building that, on the surface, seemed as ordinary as any other. I work as an assistant manager at a mid-level marketing firm in the heart of the city. We're in a building that's at least 30 years old, and though it's been renovated a few times, it still has that old, historical vibe to it. The carpets are thick, the fluorescent lights buzz constantly, and the elevators have an old-school charm to them that always makes me think of the 1980s. It's one of those buildings with a bit of character, and most days I don't think much of it. The company I work for doesn't have a lot of employees, maybe 30 or so, and after 6 p.m., it's almost like the office is deserted. Most of my coworkers head home around 5, leaving the office quiet and empty. I prefer working after hours, though. It's peaceful, and I can focus better when there's no one around. One evening, around 8 p.m., I was staying late to finish some reports for a client. It was a quiet night. No one else in the building except for a few of the night shift custodians. I'd ordered takeout earlier, and the smell of leftover Chinese food lingered in the air. After finishing up, I realized I had left my charger in my car, which was parked in the underground garage. The garage was located in the basement, and the only way to get there was through the elevator. At that point, the office was eerily quiet. The dim hum of the lights above and the occasional sound of the cleaning staff shuffling around on another floor was the only background noise. I headed toward the elevator and pressed the button to go down to the basement. The elevator doors opened almost immediately with the familiar sound of metal grinding against metal. I stepped inside, pressed the button for the basement, and waited. As the doors closed, I noticed that the elevator seemed a little off. There was a slight shudder, as if it was struggling to move. I didn't think much of it, assuming it was just a quirk of the old building. The elevator began its descent. I glanced at the floor indicator, watching it move from the first to the second, then the third floor. But when it reached the fourth floor, something strange happened. It didn't stop. The elevator kept going. I thought I must have misclicked the button and tried pressing the button for the basement again, but nothing happened. The elevator simply kept descending, past the fourth, fifth, and sixth floors. The numbers on the indicator were moving, but they didn't seem to match the floors. It felt wrong. I pressed the emergency stop button. Nothing. I pressed the open door button, hoping the doors would open to some familiar floor, but still, nothing happened. Panic began to settle in. I felt the elevator jolt slightly, and then it stopped. The doors opened. I wasn't in the basement. I wasn't even sure where I was. I stepped out cautiously, my heart pounding. The hallway I stepped into was dimly lit. The walls painted a dull, peeling gray. The air was thick and stale, and the floor was covered in a layer of dust. It looked like it hadn't been cleaned or maintained in years. There was no sign indicating what floor I was on, and I couldn't see any doors or rooms ahead. Just a long, deserted hallway stretching out in front of me. I glanced back at the elevator, but when I turned around, it was already gone. The doors had closed, and the elevator was nowhere in sight. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "Hello," I called out. My voice echoed in the empty hallway. No answer. I didn't want to explore, but I was starting to feel trapped. I had no idea where the elevator had gone, or why I was suddenly on this unfamiliar floor. I tried to call security, but my phone had no signal. I was alone. I started walking down the hallway, trying to find something familiar. I came across a door, slightly ajar. A dim light flickered from within, and I could see a faint silhouette inside. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe this was an old maintenance room or a storage area. Or maybe someone else was still working in the building. I slowly pushed the door open, expecting to find someone who could explain what was happening. But what I saw inside was far more unsettling. At a desk near the far wall sat a man. He was facing away from me, his back hunched over. He had a dark coat on, and I couldn't see his face. The light was dim enough that his features were obscured in shadows. His hands were resting on the desk in front of him, but he didn't move. He didn't acknowledge my presence. I cleared my throat nervously. "Excuse me," I called out. "Are you okay?" The man didn't respond. He didn't even look up. His stillness was unnatural, unsettling. It was as though he wasn't even aware I was there. I took a step forward, a sense of unease gnawing at me. "Hey, are you all right?" I repeated, this time louder. But still, no answer, no movement, nothing. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. Maybe he was asleep. Maybe he was just really focused on something. But something about the situation felt off. I stepped back, ready to leave the room. But just as I turned around to head back to the elevator, the man spoke. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was calm, almost like a warning. I froze in place. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Before I could respond or move, the man slowly turned his head toward me. His face was still obscured by shadow, but I could see his eyes, dark, empty eyes, like a pair of deep wells with no light. He wasn't looking at me as a person, but as if I were some kind of anomaly that didn't belong in his world. I didn't know how to react. Fear seized me and I began to back away. My foot caught on the edge of a desk and I stumbled, but I never took my eyes off the man. I felt like if I turned away, something terrible might happen. I reached the door and bolted back into the hallway, not daring to look back. My heart pounded in my chest. The silence in the building felt suffocating. I rushed back to the elevator, but when I got there, the doors didn't open. I kept pressing the button, but it didn't respond. The elevator was gone again. Panicked, I ran to the stairwell and descended several flights of stairs until I reached the lobby. I couldn't get out of the building fast enough. When I finally pushed open the front doors and stepped outside, I took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air on my skin. I hadn't realized how badly I was shaking until then. The next day, I told my coworkers about what had happened, but none of them believed me. They thought I was just tired or imagining things. Even after checking the building directory and asking around, I couldn't find any mention of a hidden floor or anything unusual. I've been back to the office since, but every time I take the elevator, I feel like I'm being watched. I've never seen the man again, but sometimes when the building is empty and quiet, I feel like something is waiting in the shadows, just out of sight. That night changed everything for me. I can't shake the feeling that the man I saw wasn't just some random employee or maintenance worker. I think he was something else entirely, something that doesn't belong in this world. And now, I'm always on edge whenever I use the elevator, wondering if I'll see him again. I've always been someone who's skeptical about the supernatural. I'm not one to believe in ghosts, haunted buildings, or any of that creepy stuff people love to tell stories about. But there's something that happened to me in an old hotel once that I still can't explain. It wasn't the kind of thing you could chalk up to being tired, or maybe a little too much caffeine. This experience still lingers with me, and every time I think about it, my mind starts to spin. It happened a few years ago, during a solo road trip I took across the country. I'd always wanted to see more of the United States, so I decided to drive and visit some small towns, stopping off at various places along the way. One night, I found myself in a small town in the Midwest. It wasn't much, just a little place off the beaten path, but there was a hotel that looked perfect for an overnight stay. It was one of those classic roadside hotels that had been around for decades, with neon signs flashing outside and a vintage charm that felt like stepping back in time. I checked in, and the front desk clerk was a friendly older man who seemed like he'd been working there for years. He handed me my key, which was attached to an old-fashioned brass tag, and I made my way to the elevator to head up to my room. The hotel was mostly empty. There were a few cars in the parking lot, but it seemed like a quiet, low-key place. The elevator was an antique, small and dimly lit, with the kind of metal doors you see in older buildings. The floors creaked as the elevator moved, and the air inside smelled faintly of dust. When I pressed the button for the second floor, I noticed something odd. The elevator didn't immediately start moving. It hesitated, as if it were deciding whether it wanted to go up at all. But after a few moments, it jerked into motion. I thought maybe the building was just old, and the elevator had its quirks, nothing to worry about. But that's when things started to get strange. The elevator didn't stop at the second floor. Instead, it kept going. It passed the third, fourth, and fifth floors that didn't even exist in the hotel's directory. The numbers on the floor indicator weren't even matching up. I stared at the panel in disbelief as the elevator continued descending deeper into the building, far past where the hotel's public areas and rooms were supposed to be. I pressed the stop button in a panic, but it did nothing. I felt the elevator slow, and then it came to a sudden halt. The doors slid open, and I was greeted with a sight I never expected. I had assumed the elevator would stop at a lower level, maybe an underground garage or maintenance floor. But when I stepped out, I found myself in a hallway that looked nothing like the rest of the hotel. The walls were cracked, the carpet was old and faded, and the air was thick with dust. There was no light except for the weak glow coming from a single bulb hanging overhead. I looked around, confused, trying to make sense of it. The hallway stretched on in both directions, leading into an eerie silence. The faint smell of mildew clung to the air. I took a few hesitant steps forward, and that's when I noticed something else odd. There were no doors, no rooms, just a long, empty corridor stretching into the unknown. The elevator doors had closed behind me, and the hallway was completely still. I called out, Hello? Is anyone here? But my voice echoed back at me, bouncing off the empty walls. I turned back toward the elevator, but when I pressed the button to call it again, nothing happened. The elevator didn't respond. In fact, the floor indicator above the doors showed no number at all, just an empty space. It felt like I was in some kind of limbo, a place that wasn't part of the hotel, but at the same time, was undeniably inside it. Panic began to rise within me. I tried my phone, but there was no signal. The hallway was cold and unnaturally quiet. I had no idea where I was, or how I'd ended up here. I walked down the hall a little further, my footsteps muffled by the old carpet. I turned a corner and came face to face with another elevator, but this one looked different. It was old and rusty, the doors were slightly ajar, and the buttons were worn and faded. Something about it felt wrong. I took a few steps back, afraid to get any closer, when I heard it, the faintest sound of someone whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but it was there, just barely audible, coming from somewhere further down the hallway. The whispering grew louder, like a muffled conversation happening in the distance. I froze, my heart racing. My mind was running through all the possible explanations, trying to rationalize it. But there was no rational explanation for this. I backed away from the elevator, feeling the weight of something unseen pressing in on me. My head was spinning. I needed to leave. I didn't know where I was or how I had ended up here, but I couldn't stay. My legs felt like lead as I turned around and sprinted back down the hallway toward the original elevator. This time, when I pressed the button, it actually lit up. The doors slid open, and I didn't hesitate. I stepped inside, hit the button for the second floor, and waited. The elevator jolted, then began its ascent. The feeling of dread still lingered, but I tried to steady myself. As the elevator climbed higher, the familiar floors started to appear on the display. First the third, then the fourth, then finally the second. The doors opened to the second floor as if nothing had happened. I stepped out, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. But when I looked back at the elevator, it was as though nothing had changed. The hallway outside was quiet and still. The elevator looked normal, like nothing had happened. I tried to shake off the fear that had gripped me, but a part of me couldn't ignore what I had just experienced. The hotel receptionist had already gone home for the night by the time I returned to the lobby, and I was too shaken to mention what had happened to anyone. I just left the next morning, eager to put the whole experience behind me. But I'll never forget what I saw, or what I didn't see that night. That hallway didn't belong to the hotel. It was like I had slipped into some forgotten part of time, a place that shouldn't have existed. I've never been able to explain what happened. Maybe it was some strange malfunction of the elevator, or maybe it was something more inexplicable. All I know is that after that night, I've never been comfortable in old buildings or elevators that move too slowly. And whenever I see a hotel with an old-fashioned elevator, I feel a cold shiver run down my spine. The feeling that there's something beneath the surface, something waiting for you to discover it, and I hope I never have to experience it again. If you've experienced a terrifying event or have a horror story to tell, we at AG Horrors want to hear from you. Share your experiences with us on Reddit, and let's uncover the mysteries hiding in the shadows together. And if you want to support the channel and help us bring even more terrifying content, consider checking out our support options on Patreon or Ko-fi. Your support means the world to us. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more spine-chilling stories like this one. And now, stay tuned for the next horror episode.